Okay, hello, ladies and gentlemen. So my name is Dr. Mamchiman Ala, and I will be moderating today's event. I want to thank everybody for attending our online conference. Today, the East Turkestan government and its lawyers will be discussing how the International Criminal Court can investigate and prosecute China's officials for genocide against Uyghurs and other Turkic peoples in East Turkestan, or what China calls Xinjiang. This event is being live streamed on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, and where you can find the live. And we ask the viewers to please send you questions as a direct comment on these platforms. Questions will be answered in the Q&A section following the statements made by the speakers. Our speakers for today are Prime Minister Salih Hudayar of the East Turkestan government in exile, and Mr. Rodney Dixon, QC, the leading lawyer for East Turkestan government in exile's case at the ICC, and additional lawyers who are working this case, who Mr. Rodney Dixon will introduce. And questions can be asked in both English and Uyghur, and I will translate if the questions are Uyghur from Uyghur into English. So now I will give you a very brief introduction in Uyghur before we start our agenda. Məninki muş vaxtınla xeyirlik bolsun, əpəndilər, xanımlar. Mənim ismim Məmtimin Əla. Mən bugünkü bizimki bu fəaliyyətimizə bugün mən bu fəaliyyətimizə yetəkçilik qılıbatımən. Bugün əminlarınki bizimki bu tordakı bu yığınımızğa qatnaşqanlığınlar üçün bugünkü bu yığındakı aldığınlar oltağan paneldəki bütün şəxslər namını sizlərə rəhmət etmən. Bugün Şərq Türkistan sürgüntü hökuməti ve onunki advokatlarınınki bilen birlikte biz xalqara jinoyy ishlar sotiga bizningki şu Şərq Türkistan hökuməti yollagan şu Xitayninki Uyghur qatliamıga münasibetlik əməldarlarını xalqaralıq qanun boyunca sotqa tartish işini bugün müşahideki advokatlar bilen hem elbette sizlerninki qatnashinglar bilen bugün bunu müzakirə qilamiz. Bugünkü bizimki bu fəaliyyətimiz tordan, naq meydandan taqiqlıyatdı. Bunun da sizler Facebook arqılıq, Twitter arqılıq və ya ki YouTube arqılıq bunu görələysizlər. Özünüz xalaqan və özünüz qolay gələn birisini tanlanglar. Şundan bir vaqtda bugünkü fəaliyyətimizdə sizler özünüzlərninki suallarınızlar bolsa, şu fəaliyyətimiz yoki cümlədən şu Uyghur qatliamınınki xalqara jinoyy ishlar sotida sotlash ahvoli to'g'risida bo'lsa, siz bevosita bugünkü şu fikir bayon qilish müşahede bir nemisi var, nemiz xat yazdıgan, sual koyduğun yer var, şu köralqa yeringlar. Şu yerga qo'ysanglar, men sualinglarni tarjima qilib beraman, hem sualinglarninki muhim qismini münasibetlik advokatlarga yoki Salih Hudayarga yollayman. Şu orqali javobiga erishinglar. Bugünkü suallarımız eng oxirida hem Uyg'urcha hem inglizcha bo'ladi. Unda bo'lsa, mening hozircha bugünkü tordagi yig'inimizni tushuntirishim hozir oxirlashdi. Endi biz o'zimizningki kun tartibi bo'yicha bugünkü yig'inimizni boshlaymiz. So let me get back to English. So first of all, I would like to invite Salih Hudayar to make a brief statement about the overall situation in East Turkestan. Salih Hudayar is the Prime Minister of the East Turkestan government in exile and the founder of the East Turkestan National Awakening Movement. So, floor is yours, Salih. Mr. Salih, please.
Firstly, I'd like to thank everyone for attending this online event and really taking their time to watch this event. As everyone knows, the situation in East Turkestan is nothing less than a genocide. Over the past 71 years, really, since the East Turkestan Republic was overthrown on December 22nd, 1949, East Turkestan and its people have been facing colonization, genocide, and occupation under the People's Republic of China and its Communist Party. In recent years, especially post 9/11, China has been using the pretext of fighting against terrorism as a means to justify its brutal campaign of colonization, genocide, and occupation in East Turkestan. More recently, starting in about 2014, China began to send at first hundreds of thousands of Uyghurs into what it called re-education centers or counter-extremism centers. By 2017, this expanded to where millions of Uyghurs and other Turkic peoples were sent into these so-called vocational training and re-education camps, which is a sick euphemism for concentration camps. By 2018, world governments and international organizations and the media began to pick up on this issue, but it wasn't until really 2019 that there was a substantial, pushback or criticism against China's atrocities in East Turkestan by the international community. In 2019 May, the U.S. Department of Defense stated that there was at least 1 million, but more likely 3 million Uyghurs and other Turkic peoples in concentration camps. We had been advocating for the Uyghur Human Rights Policy Act, which has successfully been passed and signed into law. And shortly, we also have been advocating for the US and international governments to recognize China's atrocities as a genocide, along with recognizing East Turkestan as an occupied country. It was earlier this year, the summer of 2020, on July 6th, that we filed our first ever complaint under international law, using international law and institutions like the International Criminal Court to seek justice for our people. This is a first both in terms of the International Criminal Court, and this is a first in terms of our overall struggle for freedom and independence from China. Our case was led by our lawyer, Mr. Rodney Dixon QC, who is a international human rights lawyer who had a lot of substantial experience in this regards. He had previously served as a advisor to the prosecutor's office during the Yugoslavian tribunals. Now I'd like to pass the floor to Mr. Rodney Dixon so he can talk about the overall case and how the International Criminal Court can investigate and prosecute China's officials for genocide, and what we have been doing since we filed this case, and what more needs to be done. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you might be in the world. It's a great privilege to be able to address you this evening on behalf of the government of East Turkestan in exile, who I have the pleasure to represent in filing the complaint before the ICC. I'm here tonight with the full legal team that is working on this case. If I can introduce first of all Anne Coulon, who is a French lawyer qualified in the United States, an expert in international law, who is working with us on this case, together with Paul Erdenast, a British lawyer who has experience working with the UK Parliament as well, and Nikita Bernardi, who is working on the advocacy, media and outreach aspect of the campaign. So we have got expertise in all the areas necessary to take up this case. We will also be engaging with other experts as is required when the case is taken forward. We filed this communication with the prosecutor in July of this year. It is the first of its kind for China. But we must all emphasize one that is very well grounded in international law and the jurisdiction of the court. There can be no doubt that this is a case that can be taken forward at the ICC. In a nutshell, what we have based it on is the fact that a number of acts occurred in ICC member state parties' territory. So it occurred within the territory that the court has jurisdiction over, and then those acts continued into China. And because they are continuing cross-border crimes, the ICC has jurisdiction over the entire crime, where it started and what happened thereafter. This is based on the recent precedent of the Rohingya alleged genocide, where the act started in Myanmar, which is not a state party, and then continued into Bangladesh, which is signed up. In our case, acts started in Tajikistan and Cambodia, which are countries that are signed up, and then those acts continued into China. Very specifically, we allege, and there is overwhelming evidence to support this, that Uyghurs and other Turkish victims were rounded up in these countries and other countries as well as part of a concerted campaign which continues today to ensure that all of those who oppose Chinese domination and the campaign of terror against the Uyghurs in East Turkestan are brought into China, placed in detention camps where they are targeted and persecuted. In addition, when persons escape from East Turkestan over the border into countries like Tajikistan that are signed up, that also gives the court jurisdiction. And the circle is completed because then the Chinese authorities come back into Tajikistan, a signed up country, and seek to collect those people again to drag them over the border and place them in the well-known, notorious, horrific detention centers. So there's a clear basis for the court to have authority to investigate because the crimes are being committed on ICC state parties. The international law on this point, as well as the national law, is clear in that not all of the crime has to take place on ICC state party territory. As long as a part of it does, a key element does, if it continues into a country that's not signed up, that still gives the court jurisdiction. The purpose of this law is obviously to fill the impunity gap, to make sure that crimes that are started on ICC territory are somehow not lost in a black hole of international law, that they can still be prosecuted even though they continue into a country that's not signed up, and they are perpetrated by people who are not nationals of a country which is signed up. And even if those persons never ever come into an ICC state, so even if those who are in charge of the camps don't travel in to Tajikistan, because they are there in the camps receiving people from ICC state party territory and then persecuting them, they can be held responsible. This is not a revolutionary statement of the law. This occurs all the time in our national jurisdictions, where crimes that start in one place, such as the plan to export drugs, and the drugs go through another state and end up in a third state. All three states have jurisdiction over the entire crime. And the ICC is putting into practice that very principle that all of the member states, in fact, all of the states around the world, exercise in their criminal jurisdictions. So there can be no doubt that the ICC is able to proceed. And that's exactly what we say must now happen. In this regard, it is vital, if I may emphasize, that there is unity in the Uyghur community and amongst its supporters for this case, irrespective of what views are held, because of the overwhelming suffering of the countless victims who have died or disappeared, or their families don't know where they are, or they're currently being tortured. It is vital that the pathway to justice, which is this one at the ICC, is supported across the board. There can be no reason in any way to question or seek to undermine this case. It must now be given our entire backing. If it is, there's a real chance it can succeed. Any question marks or unnecessary dissent will be used to undermine the case. We need unity to make it work. And if we stick at it for as long as is required, there will be justice brought in this case. You will have to be patient. It has taken the Rohingyas over 2 years from the time when they first filed their complaints for an investigation now to be opened. That is the nature of how things unfortunately work at the international level and at the ICC. These matters will take time to come to fruition. And just because they take time mustn't be used as a reason to question whether they are genuine and whether they can work. It's far too easy to do that and to say, oh, this isn't happening, this isn't working, let's give up. We need to persevere and keep going and keep going and keep going, as has happened in the Rohingya case, because exactly the same will happen in our case if we stick together and we keep persevering. That dedication will pay off in the end. It will become impossible for the ICC to ignore such an overwhelming and compelling case. They will have to take it up if we keep knocking on the door loudly and clearly with all the necessary evidence which is there, and certainly the legal arguments which are unquestionably all going in our favor. So now's the time not to have any doubts, not to hesitate. We have to continue full steam ahead. And in that regard, I want to emphasize what we are doing as the legal team to achieve this. And that will indicate very clearly where you, all of those who are listening and others who will listen, can support, can throw your weight fully behind this in the interests of justice and those who are suffering. It's a 10-point plan. I will go through the points swiftly. First of all, we have filed the submission, and we are now looking to meet with the prosecutor and her key lawyers and investigators as soon as possible before the Assembly of States Parties, which is due to take place in person in The Hague in the middle of December. So I'm meeting with the prosecutor, which we will report on. There may be some matters which we have to discuss confidentially and respect that, but we will report on as much as we can from that meeting, where we will be urging her to take the first step, which is to open what is called a preliminary examination. That will mean the case is officially on the books of the ICC, and that will send a very strong message that this matter is taken seriously and that it can be investigated in the future. It is, just for background, so you know, in the preliminary examination that the prosecutor decides whether she has sufficient evidence and information to open an investigation. It's exactly the same procedure that she went through with the Rohingyas, and we will follow the same procedure in this case. So open a preliminary examination first, get it officially on the books, and then move to make a decision about opening an investigation. And she'll have to apply to the judges to get that permission, as she has done before in many other situations. But a strong application, which no doubt can be made, will, in our view, succeed, and the judges can proceed to grant permission so that a full investigation can pursue. These are the hurdles we have to go through. This is not unusual to any particular situation. It applies to all cases equally that come before the ICC. We have to go through them, and we have to stick at our task to tick off each one so we can get to the ultimate goal of the investigation being open and prosecutions taking place. So that's the first point. The second point is that we are gathering statements of support for this process. That will help enormously to show that it's not only us and the victims, but the world as a whole that wants this to take place. We have already got over 65 parliamentarians from parliaments around the world who are signed up in the IPAC organization to issue a statement and send a letter to the prosecutor. And we will urge them to keep up this support and to meet with the prosecutor as well. The all-party group on the Uyghurs in the UK is also in the process of making such a statement and urging the government, the UK government, to take that step. We will also be looking at other governments in France, elsewhere, potentially in the US now as well, with a new administration, which could take a different approach to the ICC. There's the European Parliament as well, who we are engaging to lend its support to the campaign. And most recently, the UK Foreign Affairs Select Committee, which is conducting an inquiry into this matter, and we will give evidence to that committee so that its report can also recommend that the most effective way of most swiftly bringing justice to this case will be through the ICC process. It's precisely why this court was established, to be a freestanding court that can apply itself to these kinds of situations where it has jurisdiction, which it certainly does in the present case. Thirdly, we are promoting the case as widely as possible in the media world, in the legal world. Extensive advocacy outreach is taking place. We are doing interviews, we are writing articles, and Nikita is working extensively on ensuring that as many people as possible know about what we are doing and can be informed so they can support it. Fourthly, we are gathering further evidence. That process hasn't stopped. And I make an appeal now to you, to all who are listening or anyone else, to provide us with relevant evidence that we can give to the ICC prosecutor. When we made this communication initially, it was kept very confidential. I'm sure you can understand why. We couldn't speak to everyone beforehand, but now that it's public, we are gathering more evidence from the field as well to give to the ICC prosecutor, and we will do so as soon as possible. Fifthly, we are also gathering expert evidence, forensic evidence, evidence of those who have tracked the gruesome sterilization processes, the other horrific acts of torture that have occurred, the building of more and more and more camps to house persons and ultimately seek to destroy them. This is evidence, whether it might be from drones or photographs, concrete physical evidence that we can give to the prosecutor to show what is happening inside East Turkestan at the moment. So we will be giving both further evidence and expert reports as soon as we can. Sixthly, the Assembly of States Parties that I mentioned is coming up in December. We want to be active there because that's a time at which the ICC member state parties, over 120 of them, gather, and they will be there in person. So it will be a very important time to showcase what we are doing and to get support for this case. It'll be a time as well for the prosecutor to assess where she is with her various cases, and she can report. We would urge her to do so at this event, that this is going to be a priority for her and her successor, because the new prosecutor who's taking over will also be discussed then and elected in the weeks thereafter. And in fact, that is the seventh point. In early 2021, with the new prosecutor in place, we must engage that person because he or she will be the person who takes forward this investigation. It'll be one of their priorities. We will certainly put forward. It should be high on the agenda. So we will engage with the new prosecutor to take steps rapidly to get on with the investigation. Number 8, we need to travel to the region. I don't think we'll be allowed in, but we need to go to the places as close as we can to get first-hand accounts, first-hand evidence. COVID has unfortunately had a devastating effect on abilities to go there, to travel, to meet persons. But with the positive news, we hear more and more of vaccines on the horizon. We hope that in the new year we will be able to travel. Plans that we'd had have been put on the shelf for now, but we will reactivate them, because getting those first-hand accounts from the coalface will be very important evidence to hand over to the prosecutor. And we could also seek to encourage her to visit and to send teams to see firsthand what is going on. Number 9, victims are entitled to give evidence at the court. And that could be done when there's a preliminary examination, even if there's no investigation yet, especially in order to preserve evidence so that it is not lost in the event that persons either pass away or actions are taken to silence them, unfortunately. So we can get testimony taken at the seat of the court in The Hague. And then lastly, number 10, none of this can happen without support, without funding. There's a GoFundMe campaign at the moment. We need that to be able to take these steps, to get in the necessary expertise, to travel to get victims and witnesses, and to help those persons so that they can travel and give their evidence. It is vital that we have funds available to be able to take up this case effectively. We know that those who oppose us have a bottomless pot. They will be throwing everything at this to ensure that we do not succeed. And we can't fall short because we don't have the necessary resources. So all your ideas in that regard will be much appreciated, plus your support, however small it might be, in order that we can take up this work as efficiently and impactfully as possible. In conclusion, if I can emphasize, and I'm ready to answer, of course, any questions as well, that for too long, I think it was thought that it was not going to be possible to get a case at the ICC. I still hear people, surprisingly, who say that at the moment. We, without doubt, have a very clear pathway to the court now exercising its jurisdiction. And believers in international law and the scope and reach of that law to fill all impunity gaps, as well as dedicated, truly dedicated prosecutors, would have no hesitation in pursuing this case. And that's exactly what they should now do. If they shirk that responsibility, they will forever stain and tarnish the reputation of the ICC. Don't let it ever be said that this golden opportunity was missed for whatever reason. And it reminds me of the often quoted line, which so aptly applies in this case, which is that the dead and the disappeared cannot cry out for justice. It is the duty of us, the living, to be their voice and to achieve that for them. Thank you very much. We are here to answer questions, and we are here to keep fighting for you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rodney Dixon, QC, for your very detailed introduction of the whole process. And now it's a Q&A session, so please feel free to put your questions to the legal team as well as to Saleh Khudaya or to me. So now it's your time to utilize very wisely. Please go ahead.
Before we open up the questions to the floor, perhaps, Rodney, we can explain if people have evidence that they want us to see, how they can send it to us and how they can get in touch with us about it.
Yes, very importantly, if you have any information or know of others who may have information, that can be passed on directly to us. We are at Temple Garden Chambers in London and The Hague. We have an office in The Hague precisely set up to deal with the ICC and other cases there, including the ICJ as well. And we can gather the material there, we can store it safely there, we can interview you there, and we can take these matters forward with the courts there. So get in touch with us directly. Of course, you can work through the government in exile as well, who will pass it on. But we would also welcome you to call us, write to us. We can meet you, get the vital evidence to us one way or the other. Nikita is also available as our outreach person to receive such information and requests as well.
Okay. So so we have some question, but okay, so we haven't had questions, but there's one question, but I will translate that later. So
Dr. One quick thing, if you could quickly summarize what Rodney Dixon just stated in regards to people submitting evidence and so forth into the Uyghur language so that our Uyghur viewers can understand.
Just summarize what Mr. Rodney Dixon has succinctly described for us. So in Uyghur language, bu abay Rodney Dixon efendimninki muşu xalqaralıq jinoyy ishlar sotiga Xitayninki Uyg'urlarga qaratayotgan qat'iyamiga qatnashgan odamlari va muassasalariga qarata jinoyy ishlar bo'yicha sud etishninki 10 turlik qadam bosqichlarini tanishtirdi. Hozir bu bizningki bu advokatlar gruppasi, ya'ni mushu Rodney Dixon efendimninki yetakchilik bu advokatlar gruppasi hozir xalqaro jinoyy ishlar sotiga Uyg'ur qat'iyamiga oid bu bütün qonuniy bu arznamani topshirib bo'lgan. Bular shu nimaninki kelar oyninki o'ttirlarida bular maxsus Hague berib, ya Den Haag berib, ashada mazkur sotninki mush ishga qaraydigan odam bilan ko'rishib, yuzma-yuz ko'rishib, bu materiallarni taqdim ilgirliga oldi muzokara qilganligini aytdi. Shuning bilan bir vaqtda bu albatta bu Xitoyninki bu xalqaro sotga a'zo bo'lmasligi bizni hech zamon bu Uyg'ur qat'iyamini xalqaro sudga olib chiqishdan iborat bu ishda bizni hargizmi umidsizlanmaslikki yoki bu ishdan voz kechtirmaslik kerak. Chunki mayli qanday bo'lsin Xitoyninki bu ishda bu qat'iyamda mas'uliyatini surishtirishda bu qitimliq arz qilishniki ahamiyati va uning ta'sirining intayin kuchli bo'lganligini va buning uchun mazkur mushu advokatlar gruppasiniki nuqul alda mushu xalqaro sud bilan emas, balki mushu dunyoning har qaysi joylaridagi mazkur mushu sudninki Uyg'urlarning qat'iyamininki sudda ko'rilib chiqishiga qo'llaydigan nurg'unlagan parlament a'zolarininki dunyo har qaysi joydagi yordamini qo'lga keltirganligi, shuning bilan bir vaqtda dunyoning har qaysi joylaridagi yana cho'ng davlatlarning, masalan Amerika, Yevropa birligi, Fransiya, Fransiya va boshqa davlatlarning qo'llashini keltirayotganligi va buningki bu ishninki qarilishida intayin muhim rol o'ynaydiganligini ta'kidlab o'tdi. Shuning bilan bir vaqtda biz Uyg'urlarninkimi, chunki bu 10 bosqichdan ichidagi eng muhim bosqichlarning birisi mazkur sudninki Uyg'urlar guvohchilarininki mazkur qat'iyam haqidagi o'ziniki beshdan o'tgan yoki o'zi biladigan pokitlik bayonlarini anglaydigan bir qismi bor. Bu qismi qarta Uyg'urlarninki mushu sot mushu advokatlar gruppasiga o'zi bilgan ham qo'ldagi paketlik butkul uchurlarni ta'minlab bersa, bu ishninki g'alaba qilishda intan muhim rol o'ynaydi. Chunki bu oxirsida bular bilan aloqalashish yo'llari tunishtirildi. Buning bilan biz albatta agar buni aloqalashishda qiyinchilik bo'lib qolsa yoki Solih inimizlar yoki men bilan aloqalasanglar, men sizlarninki ta'minlaydigan materiallarni sizlarga vakolatdan bu advokatlar gruppasiga biz yetkazib berishga tirishchilik ko'rsatamiz. Shuning bilan bir vaqtda bu endi Xitoyninki mush qitimli qatliamda jinoyatidan qochanmasligi va xalqaroninki adolatiningki yurgizishda intayin muhim rol o'ynadi. Ham bu intayin qiyin, ham vaqti uzoq cho'ziladigan bir ish bo'lishi mumkin. Shuning bilan bir vaqtda masalan biz Rohingyalarninki qatliam qaraydigan bo'lsak, 2 yildan ortiqroq vaqtdan beri Rohingyalarninki qatliamda mushu xalqaro sotninki qarab chiqishdan xeyli zo'r darajada ilgirlashlarga erishdi. Bu ham Uyg'urlarning ishig'imi, buni ham Uyg'urlarninki navbatdagi qatliamininki xalqaro sotda qarilib chiqishida intayin muhim rol o'ynaydi. Ham shunday o'xshash bir bosqichni bosadi. Bu bosqich ham qiyin, ammo buningki kelgusidagi natijasi va mevasi Uyg'urlarninki bu qatliamda adolatga erishishda intayin muhim rol o'ynaydi. Shuning uchun hech qaysimizningki bu ishda ümidsizlanmasligimizni, bel qo'yib etmasligimizni ham buningga qarta hech zamon turli shakllardagi dargumanda bo'lmasligimizni talab qilaman degan shaklda bo'ldi. Shuning bilan men hozir tunishtirishni hozir to'xtatman. Endi savolinglar bo'lsa, bu fursatni chiqib so'rashinglarni umid qilaman. Qani.
Thank you very much, Dr. Alla. There's a few questions that have come through in English, which I can ask directly. And then, Dr. Alla, I see there's 2 questions in Uyghur that have come through as well. So I'll quickly ask the English ones. So Rodney, someone is asking if we're already in the preliminary phase of the investigation, and then as a follow-up question, how has the ICC responded to the complaint or lack thereof in terms of internal communication with us? And is there a place that we can find the 80-page complaint or an excerpt of it? I read that it includes a list of 30+ Chinese officials said to be responsible for this campaign.
The last question first. The complaint is not public at the moment because we are engaging with the prosecutor still on it. Plus, it contains some confidential information. We will make it available in due course as the process moves along. We have named the suspects, but also we haven't made that public because, once again, that's respecting the internal process with the prosecutor to discuss these matters. But we have made clear that the suspects are those most responsible, and it goes to the very highest level. But it will be made public in due course. With regard to the stage that we are at the moment, we are in the preliminary stage. The prosecutor has a policy where there are 4 stages that she goes through in the preliminary examination. We are in stage 1. Stage 1 is where she looks at our communication as it's been filed, and she decides whether it is within her jurisdiction. If it is, then she moves to phase 2, which is then the formal opening of a preliminary examination, where she looks at whether or not there is a reasonable basis to believe that crimes were committed. Stage 3 is complementarity, admissibility. Stage 4, she looks at the interests of justice and whether that has any impact on opening an investigation. So she goes through these 4 stages before she decides to go to the judges to apply to open an investigation, as she did in the Rohingya case. So she is in stage 1 at the moment. She's looking at our communication. We have asked to meet with her, and we're hoping that will take place soon. That'll be a way to explore with her what is her thinking about this. And what we are hopeful of, because it would be the right approach to take, is that she will move swiftly to stage 2 and open the preliminary examination so that she can start looking at the actual crimes and the evidence of those crimes. So we are at the early stages. This is usual, but we are looking to change the gears fast and get through those other stages so we can get the matter before the judges as quickly as we can.
Okay, great. So I will translate one of the questions in Uyghur. So I translate. So last week, the US government stated that the Tibet is an occupied country or nation. So we Uyghurs have not been able to be recognized a China occupied nation so far. So the question is that in 1946, the General Zhang Jizhong from the Chinese Nationalist Party, who came to Kashgar, where he made a speech for the Chinese soldiers. Then he mentioned that the East Turkestan is a occupied nation. So is it possible for this whole process to take into account this issue of East Turkestan being a China occupied nation?
The short answer is yes. Those matters can all be considered as part of the overall factual matrix of the crimes that we are alleging. However, the ICC doesn't have any jurisdiction to decide whose territory it is. That might well be an issue for another jurisdiction if we can get there. And of course, we would always look to take the case to wherever we could go to get justice for the Uyghur people. But for the ICC, we are focusing on the crimes that have been committed. Genocide and crimes against humanity can take place irrespective of whether there's a war, irrespective of whether territory is occupied or not. They can take place in peacetime as they are here. And that's what we are focusing on, showing the plan to commit both alleged crimes against humanity and genocide, and who's responsible for that. Now, in looking at that, of course, we'll have to go through the history. We'll have to look at what was done and what was said many decades before, including what's in the court's jurisdiction, so that the intention behind these crimes, which you have to prove in criminal law, the intention can be understood, as well as what acts have taken place. But I'd ask Sally if he wanted to say anything, or my colleagues to add anything to that as well, if they would.
So does anybody have anything to add to what Mr. Rodney Dixon has said?
No.
Okay, so if that's the case, I will turn to a next question. Again, question I quote, what will happen if China rejects calls of ICC in the future?
Yes, it doesn't matter if China rejects the ICC's request for assistance or help. The ICC can go ahead. It's done that in many other situations before without the cooperation of a non-state party. It might make it more difficult, and the ICC will have to find innovative ways around that. But it does not depend on China recognizing the court or in any way supporting the court. Courts can exercise their jurisdiction, as often happens in national systems, even if the parties who are being investigated don't like it. That's the whole point of a criminal justice system. However, having said that, China would be encouraged to engage with the court on these matters. If there is nothing to hide, if there is innocence, then they will have every opportunity to show that before the court. And their rights should be recognized as much as the rights of anyone, in having the right to reply and respond and provide evidence and engage constructively in this process. That could help very much in the long-term healing and peace-building process in the region. So it's not something where China should automatically close its eyes and shut the door. That might be their knee-jerk response, but they would be encouraged to work with international institutions, as they do at the UN level. If, unfortunately, they choose not to, well, then the court will be entitled and should go ahead with its work, as it's done in other situations where it's come up against the brick wall.
Okay. So again, does anybody have any other thing to add? Yeah, please.
Oh, no, I was just going to say there was a similar question that asked that, but I think, Rodney, you ended up answering that. I've seen there's 2 more follow-up questions that have come through, which is, could you please explain what are the likely consequences for those held responsible if the ICC were to find the genocide charges valid? As we said, this is the first such case filed against China.
Yes, if there was an investigation open and there was sufficient evidence that the prosecutor could gather, then she could charge individuals. She can't go against the state of China, but she can charge state officials and individuals for their individual criminal responsibility, their role in the alleged genocide and crimes against humanity. If she charged them, they could then be arrested if they traveled outside of China. Of course, China could be asked to cooperate and hand them over, but if it didn't do that, then they could be arrested elsewhere and put on trial in The Hague. The court can wait for however long. It might take 10, 15, 20 years. We all know how long it took for the former president Milosevic of Serbia finally to be handed over, or others who were hiding away in monasteries and elsewhere. But they were finally captured and handed over to the court. And when it was thought that it couldn't happen, that they would get away with it, exactly the opposite happened. The same occurred with Charles Taylor. There are lots of examples of people thinking, no, this is going to be fine. And in the end, it turns around to bite them. So it might be, once again, a long-term process, but there's no statute of limitations. The court can wait until the person is arrested. That doesn't mean we shouldn't keep doing everything to protect those who are vulnerable at the moment, and other steps can be taken. But just the fact that there is an investigation, that there are charges, that there are arrest warrants, could have a deterrent effect on more crimes being committed. And that's why it's so important that these steps are taken, to show that the world is not turning away, that there will be consequences. And that can sometimes make people think twice about whether they're prepared to do this, and lessen the impact on the victims who are suffering at the forefront of it.
Okay, so there's another question that is interesting question, that is there an ICC member, financially contributing country that's sponsoring the case? Is that relevant at all in your case?
No, we have no ICC state who's funding this being brought forward. States have supported it, as we've said. Some parliamentarians have supported it. No governments as such have supported it, but individual parliamentarians have supported it publicly, not in terms of finances, but publicly supporting it. We have relied entirely on the GoFund to be able to take this forward. And that's why I made the appeal at the end that we've got to keep using that in order to ensure that we can keep this as vibrant as possible. Because without that, it becomes very difficult, especially knowing what we are up against.
Okay. Does anybody have anything to add? Otherwise, I will turn to the next question. We have more questions now. So I will just use the time quite efficiently. So the next question is that will the ICC investigation have any impact on the scheduled Beijing Olympics? End question.
Well, it's entirely separate, but of course the Olympics can be used as a way of highlighting the injustice and the need for an investigation and prosecution. And countries should be seriously considering whether or not to participate in something like that if these crimes continue as they are and increasing at the moment. But the ICC will conduct its work separate from any other organization, independently. That's what gives it its real value, and it is therefore considered as a body unconnected with any political party, political events. It is the one place where an independent investigation can take place now, and should do so.
Okay, thank you. Again, next question. that this question, I guess, is from an Uyghur person. So it's quite important for all of us to know about this. A good question. So question is, could you please specify the evidence that shall be submitted to ICC to succeed?
Yes, we need the best possible evidence. There's a rule in evidence called the best evidence rule, and that's what we need. We need first-hand accounts of persons who have been through this. And we know that there have been thousands, tens of thousands. But very often it's difficult for people to come forward. They are afraid, or their families are still inside, or they don't have the means, or they can't access us. But that's what we're encouraging people to do, to give us the first-hand accounts of what they've seen and what they've heard. Together then with what I was mentioning earlier, the so-called higher up evidence, where we would be able to gather information about what documents they are that are passing at the highest levels, potentially intelligence as well. And then video footage, drone evidence, material from inside, which has been so impactful in some of the media revelations when Chinese officials have been unable to deny that these camps exist because of the real physical evidence. That's still what counts the most. In these trials, seeing it directly in video, audio form, where it's impossible to deny it. So we're looking for the best possible evidence. Of course, we can use wider inferences and circumstantial evidence as well. But we want to, as we know exists, and we've got a lot of it already, and we're going to add to it, evidence that shows direct participation in these crimes.
Thank you. So let me abuse my position just to elaborate on this question, quite important. So unlike any other previous genocides, including Holocaust, Rwanda, and the Rohingya, so Uyghur genocide has less evidence because of the high control of China for any leaks, as you know that. So do you think that this not sufficient, insufficiency of this evidence will have some kind of considerable impact on the whole process in the strict sense of the word?
I mean, as a lawyer, I'm always worried about a lack of evidence. Even though you know what the situation is, you've got to have the tangible evidence to prove it. And of course, the Chinese authorities will go out of their way to stop that coming out, or insiders or whistleblowers giving evidence. But what we see that has been gathered so far from the experts, from people who've been able to get in, is a overwhelming amount of evidence that is being amassed. So it is there. One always has to get more and refine it. But this is not a matter that we need to be concerned about. The bigger issue is getting the forum to take it up. We say, and this is right, the forum exists to do it. Now get on and analyze that evidence because it's there. But we've got to get through that first door of the forum being open, which it should be.
Okay, thank you. So
if they want to add on the evidence side.
Yeah.
Yes, I just wanted to add one thing. At the end of this, we'll send through an email address that's a secure Proton Mail email address, which people can send any evidence that they think is relevant to us. And also, if there are any further questions, you can send them to that email address, and I will write the address in the comment section at the end of this talk.
Thank you, Nikita. So the next question is I quote, does it mean that Xi Jinping, when he travels to anywhere outside of China, will be arrested? End question.
Only if he is charged and there's an indictment against him and that he's wanted, therefore, by the ICC, then as applies to any world leader currently, the ICC, if they have charged them on the basis of sufficient evidence, could seek their arrest wherever they go. The ICC has held that there is no immunity for a head of state for their crimes before the ICC. I have to add, in fairness, this is not a matter that's yet been fully ventilated and tested before the International Court of Justice, but that's the ICC's position based on the existing law. Wherever he traveled, he could be arrested if there was an arrest warrant. And I think the overwhelming number of people who are listening to this would say that's the correct interpretation of the law in this case, and he shouldn't have any special status for these crimes. If there's evidence against him, he should be put on trial, and of course he'll have his rights to a fair trial, but that's the way in which the wheels of justice turn, and they should turn in his case as they would in any ordinary citizen's case.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody have anything to add? So I will turn to the perhaps one last question. So the question is, can other parties join this complaint later now it has been submitted? End question.
Certainly, there's no limitation. The prosecutor can receive Article 15. That's the article this communication was filed under. Article 15 communications can be received from any groups that have relevant evidence. So others can join in, and the more the merrier, in fact, because the more we can show that there are multiple groupings supporting this. This is not one grouping doing it for any particular political reason. It's being done for justice. Plus, we can show that there's multiple sources of evidence. The stronger the case will be, and the more likely it is that the prosecutor will have to take on the case and open an investigation. So we must make this broad-based. I'd like to end where I started off by saying we must have a unified alliance on this issue across the board in the interests of all Uyghur and other Turkic victims. We must ensure now that we take it forward in a way which can never be labeled as divisive, which can never be in some way used to undermine the cause for justice. So others can join, and I would encourage them to do so. And we can help to coordinate that and make sure that the prosecutor is informed that there's not just one or two or three groupings, but a host of concerned groupings, citizens around the world who've been directly affected, bringing this to her attention. And that will increase our chances of success immeasurably.
Thank you. So I just want to remind you of the time. So our timing is running out. So I would like you to ask you last questions. So actually we have planned this for 1 hour. So we already have 56 minutes. So we have for 5 minutes. So I would like to choose very, let me say, it's good questions or very urgent questions, let me say. So I would like to take these questions again from the same person. That question is this. So if we succeed, the ICC will impose sanctions against with Chinese officials, or it will take what kind of actions? End question.
If we succeed, Chinese officials in an investigation, if there's sufficient evidence, can be charged and therefore put on trial if they are arrested before the ICC. They can't be sanctioned, in other words, placed on travel bans or have their assets frozen or anything like that, unless they are charged by the ICC. Then they could be arrested if they travel. There are possibilities to freeze assets as well because of ongoing proceedings. And if they are convicted, they could be ordered to pay reparations to the victims. But that's all dependent on the charges and the criminal trial. Separate from that, governments could impose sanctions on individuals. Here in the UK, we have Magnitsky legislation, which allows the government, it hasn't done so yet, but it allows the government to place travel bans on persons and freeze their assets. And we would encourage the government to do that. That is something that I didn't put on the 10-point plan yet because we're still looking at it, but it's something that could certainly be taken up at the right time in the future, and should be. But that is separate from what the ICC is doing. The government of the UK and other governments should be supporting the need for an investigation by the ICC and also considering their own individual sanctions.
Okay, thank you. I would like to take a question about the organ harvesting, which is happening now in a very at a very alarming rate. So the question is, would ICC will investigate this horrendous crime of China, or it will be another court?
Sorry, if you could you just repeat the question again?
This is about the organ harvesting. So question is, let me just read the whole text, then the question. So evidences for forced organ harvesting from Uyghurs are happening now in camps and prisons. The question is, would ICC will investigate this horrendous crime of China, or it will be another court? End question.
No, this can come within the court's jurisdiction, certainly, because it's one of those barbaric, inhumane acts that can constitute an act of both a crime against humanity and potentially genocide as well. So those allegations and all of the related allegations about the targeting and persecuting of Uyghurs can come within the ICC's jurisdiction on the basis that it can be linked to crimes that started outside the country to round up persons and bring them into the country. But also, even if for some reason an argument is made that they are separate, they can still be looked at as part of the pattern, the context, to show the crime against humanity or genocide, which both require a wider pattern of conduct in order to prove the crime. So either way, they can come within the court's jurisdiction if they are directly affecting the Uyghurs and others in that region. There have been allegations of this happening elsewhere. That would have to be done separately. But in relation to East Turkestan, certainly, this is what we are putting before the court as a matter to be taken up within the court's jurisdiction.
Thank you so much, Rodney. I'm just going to take over from Dr. Allah, who has to leave quickly. I think those are all the questions that have come through, and also we've reached the 1 hour time slot that we had set aside for this. So thank you very much, everyone who has joined us today, and for all your fantastic questions. Just to reiterate, the email has now been added to the comment section on the right of the screen. It is iccuyghur@protonmail.com. And it's a secure email. You can send us any other questions. And as I said, you can submit any evidence to that email, and we will consider it all very carefully and look at it carefully. And we will also, of course, take it confidentially and be very careful with what we do with it. So thank you very much for listening to us today. I don't know, Saleh, if you have anything else that you wish to add, or Rodney, but I think otherwise we've reached the end of the discussion, and I think it's been very fruitful, and please keep engaging with us. We've also added the link to the GoFundMe page in the comment section. If you have anything that you can give to donate to support the case, it will be very, very appreciated. So thank you all very much.
The only other thing I would add is that the Proton Mail is best for sending information and evidence. But we are at Temple Garden Chambers in London and The Hague, myself and my colleagues who are with me today. We have email addresses and we put updates on our webpage. You can follow that and make contact that way. But for evidence and confidential information, use the Proton Mail and keep in touch with us. We'll certainly look to do more of these in the future to keep you informed. It is going to be, as I said at the beginning, a longer than usual process. We must be patient, but we'll get there in the end.
Thank you so much, everybody. So, Saleh, do you have anything to add?
Yes, I just quick statement to everyone listening, especially parliaments, and we again call on governments around the world to support this case. we urge them to recognize the atrocities as a genocide. So far, we have been able to successfully get the Canadian Parliament to recognize it as a genocide, and the US Senate has introduced a resolution to recognize it as a genocide. But we need more governments around the world to recognize the atrocities as what it is, and to apply, all forms of political pressure, both to convince the ICC to take this case more urgently, and to go in par with this case by raising this issue at the UN Security Council, and possibly filing a parallel complaint at the International Criminal Court. Other things that governments can do, as we mentioned earlier, is to sanction Chinese officials that are responsible for genocide and other crimes against humanity that is happening in East Turkestan, by indicting them, in absentia. In some countries like the United States, there are laws that allow the US government to, or allow governments to indict foreign nationals, be they government officials or not, for crimes against humanity that they have perpetrated. Thank you.
So thank you so much, everybody. Today, this session is conclusive, and thank you so much for Mr. Rodney Dixon, and thank you so much for Salih Hudayar, and thank you so much for Anne and Paul and Nikita and everybody, and also those who are watching our program. So hopefully this process will be quite successful and quite urgent, because the situation of East Turkestan is deteriorating day by day. And so we would like this whole process will bring some fruit, also be quite successful for the future of Uyghur people suffering from this horrendous crime against humanity. Thank you so much for your time. This is the end of our session. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.